England's cliffs are collapsing, entire villages are disappearing, and the coastline is retreating at an alarming pace. On the east coast of England right now, the ground beneath people's homes is literally falling into the sea, not gradually, not in some far-off future. Streets that were there last year are gone, and homes where families have lived for decades have tumbled off the edge. The land is vanishing faster than anyone predicted. Here's what makes this even more shocking. Some villages are being protected. New beaches are being built, and millions of pounds are spent on defenses holding back the sea. But not everyone is so lucky. Just a few miles down the coast, other villages are being left to be swallowed by the waves. And the reason behind this will make your blood boil. This isn't just a story about eroding cliffs or a disappearing coastline. It's a story about who gets to survive and who is abandoned to the tide.
So the question is, when the government's own documents once promised these communities 300 years of safety and now give them just 20, whose homes get to be worth fighting for? England's east coast is disappearing, not metaphorically, not gradually in some way that scientists track over centuries. It is falling into the sea right now, in chunks, overnight, sometimes without a single warning sound. The cliffs here are not the dramatic white rock faces you picture when you think of Britain's coastline. These are soft, dark walls of ancient sand, clay, and glacial debris, material that has never been particularly strong and is becoming weaker by the year. When a storm hits, or when heavy rain soaks into the ground from above, entire sections simply let go. One moment, there is land. The next morning, there is a hole where a field used to be. No earthquake, no dramatic wave, just gone. And the numbers behind what is happening here are staggering. Some stretches of this coastline are losing between 1 and 2 meters of land every single year. In bad years, far more. Whole properties vanish in a single storm season. Roads that appear on maps no longer exist. Entire streets that housed families a generation ago now exist only in old photographs and the memories of people who watched them fall. But what makes this crisis different from anything that came before is the speed. This coastline has always eroded. Geologists will tell you it has been retreating since the last ice age, slowly releasing the soft material left behind by glaciers thousands of years ago. That is natural. That is expected. What is not expected is the rate at which it is now accelerating. Rising sea levels mean waves arrive higher and hit harder. Storms that used to allow the coastline months to recover are now arriving back to back, stripping away material before the land has any chance to stabilize. And then there is the threat from above. It is not only the sea doing the damage. Heavy rainfall saturates the unstable ground at the top of the cliffs, adding enormous weight to material that is already barely holding together. The result is sudden, catastrophic slumping. Not a gradual slide, a collapse. One overnight rain event can take more land than a dozen ordinary storms. The villages sitting on top of these cliffs have watched this happen for years. They have watched car parks shrink toward the edge. They have watched beach access ramps get swallowed. They have watched neighbors pack up and leave, and then watch the spot where those homes stood simply cease to exist. This is not a distant warning. This is not a projection on a climate report. This is the present reality of dozens of communities along England's east coast, and it is getting worse every single winter. Happisburgh should not exist anymore. That is not a dramatic exaggeration. At the current rate of erosion, scientists and coastal engineers project that the entire village could be completely consumed by the sea within 80 years. Not abandoned, not relocated, gone. Swallowed entirely by the same water that has been eating at its foundations for decades. What stands to be lost is not just bricks and mortar. Happisburgh is one of the oldest continuously inhabited stretches of coastline in all of Europe. Its Saxon church has stood for over 1,000 years. Its ancient burial ground holds generations of the same families who still live here today. Its 17th century inn has served locals through wars, famines, and floods. And its lighthouse, built in 1790, still stands as a landmark visible for miles. It used to have a twin. That twin is already gone, submerged beneath the waves. Now engineers warn that the surviving lighthouse may eventually become an island, with water cutting around both sides of it as the land connecting it to the village disappears. Bryony lost her home here in 2013. She watched it go over the edge. She is still bitter about it, and she has every right to be. Because what makes her story so infuriating is that the erosion that took her home was not inevitable. There were defenses in place, old ones, ugly ones, metal pipes filled with concrete and deteriorating wooden revetments, but they were working. They were breaking the force of the waves. When those defenses were removed in the name of tidying up the beach, the cliff started retreating at a pace that shocked even the locals. Bryony moved back 50 meters from the new cliff edge. She was offered 40% of her home's value under a government scheme to relocate inland. She turned it down. She refuses to retreat. Her neighbor Nicola has a different calculation running in her head. Her home would be worth £375,000 if it sat anywhere else in the county. Because of where it sits, its value has collapsed to £125,000. She knows she will likely have to leave. She is not angry in the way Bryony is angry. She is just quietly absorbing a loss that nobody is going to compensate her for properly. Walk through Happisburg today, and the evidence is everywhere. A car park shrinking toward a drop that did not used to be there. A beach access ramp washed away by a single spring tide just weeks ago. And at the cliff edge, an emergency sign marking the spot where a house stood just 1 month before. Not years ago. 1 month ago. The cliff is right there, and this is not even a rough day. Drive a few minutes north from Happisburg and something changes. The cliffs still look the same. The sky is still the same gray. The wind still hits with the same cold force, but the coastline here feels different. There is a beach, a real one, wide and deep, with enough sand between the sea and the village behind it to make the waves feel like a distant problem rather than an immediate threat. This is Walcott, and the reason it still has that beach is not geography. It is not luck. It is money, specifically the money of one of the most powerful energy companies on the planet. Directly behind Walcott sits the Bacton Gas Terminal. This facility processes and delivers roughly 1/3 of the entire United Kingdom gas supply. It is, by any definition, a site of critical national importance. And in 2019, the companies operating that terminal decided they could not afford to let the coastline in front of it keep disappearing. So they paid for it to stop. Shell and its partner companies funded 2/3 of a £25 million coastal defense project. The government's Environment Agency contributed less than a quarter of the total cost. The rest came from private energy interests, protecting private infrastructure. What followed was extraordinary to watch. In just 6 weeks, a dredging ship deposited 1.8 million cubic meters of sand onto the coastline at Walcott. A new beach, built from scratch, designed to absorb wave energy and buy the village time. Pauline Porter, a Walcott resident, describes the day that Dredger arrived as one of the most emotional of her life. She talks about tears of joy, about the entire village lining the shore for days, bringing sandwiches and wine, watching the sand arrive like it was theater. 6 years they had been holding their breath after a devastating storm. 6 years of near misses and crossed fingers. And then the ship came. The defenses are projected to last around 15 years. And even locals will quietly admit the sand seems to be thinning again. On storm days, the seawall still shakes the houses. The water still occasionally clears the top of the wall and wets the road. Nature has not surrendered. It has just been slowed down. But here is the truth that nobody in Walcott tries to hide. The village was not saved because it mattered to the government. It was saved because a gas terminal needed protecting. Walcott benefited because it happened to be standing in the way of something commercially irreplaceable. A few miles south, Happisburg has no gas terminal. It has no corporate sponsor. It has no equivalent commercial argument. And so it has no beach. The difference between Walcott and Happisburg is not a coincidence. It is a policy. Understanding that policy means understanding exactly how the British government decides which communities are worth saving and which ones are quietly written off.
Rob Goodlift, the coastal manager for the local council, explains the system with the measured tone of someone who's had this difficult conversation countless times with people losing their homes. For a location to receive coastal protection, 3 criteria must be met. The defense must be technically feasible, it must meet environmental standards, and, most importantly, it must be financially justifiable according to the government's cost-benefit calculations.
What that last condition means in practice is brutal in its simplicity. The government runs a formula. It counts the number of dwellings at risk. It estimates the cost of protection. If the numbers do not reach the required threshold, the funding does not come. Fewer homes means lower priority. Lower priority means no defense. No defense means the sea wins. Clive Stockton owns Happisburg's 16th century village inn. He bought it 30 years ago, at which point the government's own shoreline management plan gave the coastline here a projected lifespan of 300 years. He built his life around that number, his business, his retirement, his family's future. The official document said 300 years. It is now revised to somewhere around 20 years. His pub, which would be worth close to £1 million anywhere else in Norfolk, is virtually unsaleable. Its only remaining value is whatever revenue it can generate before the cliff takes it. He is not angry in a loud way. He is angry in the way that people get when they have been let down so completely that the emotion has nowhere left to go. The policy shift happened gradually, almost invisibly. The government's position moved from hold the line to no active intervention to managed retreat, and finally to managed realignment. Each phrase sounds more considered than the last. Each one represents another step toward the same outcome. Abandonment. Then there is Hemsby, a major holiday resort further down the coast, generating £80 million a year in tourism revenue. Even with that economic argument sitting right there in plain numbers, Hemsby still struggles to qualify for meaningful defense funding under the government's own metrics. The lifeboat station there has been so severely undermined by erosion that the launch ramp has collapsed into a sheer vertical drop. The lifeboat cannot launch at all. When pushed directly, the coastal manager admits that with £20 to £40 million, erosion at Happisburg could potentially be slowed. The money was simply never allocated. That is not a natural disaster. That is a decision. To understand why this coastline is losing the fight, you have to understand what it is actually made of. This is not the solid white chalk of the White Cliffs of Dover. It is not hard limestone or ancient granite. The cliffs of England's east coast are built from soft glacial deposits, sand, clay, silt, and gravel left behind by retreating ice sheets thousands of years ago. Material that was never particularly stable, never particularly strong, and never particularly well suited to standing at the edge of the North Sea indefinitely. The geology here has always made erosion inevitable. Coastal scientists say this stretch of coastline has been retreating since the last ice age. That is not alarming on its own. What is alarming is what is happening to the rate. The forces accelerating that erosion are now compounding on top of each other in ways that give the land almost no chance to recover. Rising sea levels are the first accelerant. As global temperatures increase, ocean water expands and polar ice melts, pushing sea levels steadily higher. Higher water means waves arrive with more energy, strike the base of the cliffs at a more destructive angle, and remove more material with every single impact. Cliffs that once had months to partially stabilize between major storm events are now being hit again before any recovery is possible. The window between attacks is closing. Intensifying storms are the second accelerant. The same climate shifts that are raising sea levels are also loading Atlantic weather systems with more energy. Storms that would once have been considered exceptional are arriving with increasing frequency, stripping material from the coastline faster than any natural process can replace it. But the most underestimated threat is not coming from the sea at all. It is coming from above. Heavy rainfall saturates the soft ground at the top of the cliffs, adding enormous weight to material that is already structurally compromised. Water works its way down through the layers, lubricating the boundaries between different soil types until cohesion simply fails. The result is not a gradual slide. It is a sudden, catastrophic collapse, a slump. An entire section of cliff face letting go at once, overnight, without warning. Angie, a former local coastal counselor, describes standing at the edge of a site where exactly this happened. A vast section of land that was there one day was gone the next. One enormous hole, caused not by waves, but by rain. And here is what makes the future genuinely frightening. These two forces, the sea attacking from below and the rain destabilizing from above, are both going to get worse. The science on that is not disputed. The only question is how much worse and how fast. What the sea takes, it does not give back. That is the part of this story that gets lost in the policy debates, the funding formulas, and the engineering assessments. Because what is disappearing along England's east coast is not just property. It is not just land value on a spreadsheet. It is history that cannot be replaced, recovered, or relocated. Once it goes over that cliff edge, it is gone forever. Happisburgh's St. Mary's Church has stood for over 1,000 years. Its graveyard holds the remains of generations of local families, people whose descendants still walk the same streets today. But it also holds something far older and far more extraordinary. In 1801, one of Admiral Nelson's warships, HMS Invincible, ran aground on Happisburgh sands during a violent storm. 400 people were on board. The ship was lost. 119 bodies were eventually recovered from the water and brought ashore, buried here in this churchyard, in this ground that now sits yards from a crumbling cliff edge. The same sea that took those sailors is coming back. And at the current rate of erosion, it may not be long before it reclaims them entirely. Standing in that graveyard, knowing what lies beneath it, and knowing how close the edge is, carries a weight that no flood risk assessment can fully capture. These are not abstract losses. They are the physical remains of real people, placed here 2 centuries ago by communities that believed this ground was permanent. The sea has already proven that belief wrong once. It is in the process of proving it wrong again. But the losses extend even further back than Nelson's Navy. This coastline is one of the most significant archaeological sites in all of Europe. Ancient human footprints have been found preserved in the cliffs here, evidence of human presence dating back hundreds of thousands of years. Happisburgh holds some of the oldest known traces of early humans ever discovered in Northern Europe. The site carries official designation as a site of special scientific interest, an acknowledgement of its irreplaceable scientific value. Yet that designation has not produced protection. The footprints, the artifacts, the layered geological record of human history embedded in these cliffs are being lost to the sea at the same rate as everything else. There is a particular cruelty in this. Managed retreat as a policy accepts the loss of homes and accepts the loss of communities. But it also accepts the permanent erasure of things that belong not just to Norfolk, not just to England, but to the entire human story.
The sea doesn't care whether it's washing over a family's home or ancient land. It takes everything indiscriminately. The government calls it managed realignment, but residents call it abandonment, betrayal, and surrender. In Happisburgh, locals like Brian see it as fundamentally un-British to retreat from a coastline their communities have occupied for centuries. While engineers say defenses might not be physically impossible, politicians admit funding and priorities decide who is protected, and who is left to the waves. Some villages are saved, often due to corporate or commercial interests, while others crumble because they lack political or financial backing. Retreating inland may slow loss, but it doesn't stop it, and with rising seas and stronger storms, the danger is only growing. What's clear is that Britain doesn't have a coastal erosion crisis, it has a priority crisis. Communities like Happisburgh, Trimmingham and Hemsby are losing homes, churches, graveyards and entire villages, watching the cliffs fall into the sea while government formulas quietly decide they don't qualify for protection. The coast keeps retreating, storms will intensify, and the land will continue to vanish, leaving families wondering why they were abandoned.